So one of the things that I always advise the students or the learners to be on the lookout for is the instruction and information that is given to candidates before they write examination. Now, it's mostly the same. Non-programmable calculators may be used. And then there is the rounding part that a lot of students or learners are seemingly not getting. So it's very important that if in the answer they don't tell you what degree of accuracy you're supposed to take, or in the question rather, then you follow the one that is given in front of the question paper on the cover page. You're supposed to leave your answers to 3 significant figures, and if it's angles, you give to 1 decimal place. A lot of times money calculations are also given to 2 decimal places, but please have a look through the question. Make sure you understand each question as it comes. And for the value of pi, you either use your calculator value, and once you use your calculator value, and since pi is an irrational number, it will definitely mean that you have to give your answer then correct to 3 significant figures. Or you just rather use 3.142, which is a terminating decimal, so that is one of the conditions that you have there. Again, there is a lot of other information. Please make sure that you do read them in the examinations when you get that. So normally the first questions are based on number concepts, money and finance. It's quite the part that I said that a lot of students are supposed to get good marks here. So you have a list of numbers, 81, 82, and 83, 85, the square root of 86, the cube root of 89, and 88. So from these numbers, you are supposed to, for example, the first one, get a multiple of 4. Now that is very easy. 4 goes in any number that ends with a, yeah, that's correct. Any number that ends with an 8 or a multiple of 4, yeah? So 8, 88, 4 goes there, so definitely that answer is 44. A prime number is a number that only has got 2 factors. That means only one, and the number itself can go into that number. Please make sure that you pick the right one. These are all 1-mark questions, and they are correct answers only. A square number, 81. 81 is square of 9. Straightforward questions. A factor of 246. Now, when you look at this particular question here, you just play around. You take all your even numbers. That's one way of doing it, and divide an even number in an even number, or you can even add up the digits and so on. But it should be very easy for you to arrive at the factor of 246, which is 82. Now, an irrational number is a number that cannot be written as a fraction. You know, it goes on and on and on, the same like the value of pi on a calculator. So the square root of 86 is one of those numbers, and even the cube root of 89. They are irrational. Then this is just something you take your calculator. You should not be able to get this wrong, not much. You just, one of the things that I always do for checking, I count my digits 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I know that I should have about 7 places in my answer. But grab your calculator and just have all of these digits there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, as I said. So from here, they'll probably ask you to round it. And they say, now you must round to 3 significant figures. Now, here's the thing about significant figures. Actually, we are talking about what is most significant. Although there are no units, all right, doesn't mean you must throw this away, because this tells you that you are dealing with a number that is slightly less than a unit. All right, so when you round, your answer should also be round about there, okay? The first non-zero digit, in this particular case, 8. That is your first significant figure. So it's going to be the first one, the second, and the third one. So that 0 is also significant. But now, this 9 is going to round that to a 1. So the answer should therefore be 0.801. Please do not write 801. 801 is distinct. It's far from a 0.8 number. Then they say you must take your answer in this part and you write it in standard form. Now, I have done them both because some of the students are going to take the answer in part A or Roman 1. And in standard form, remember, it's another way of writing a number, okay? Very small numbers or very large numbers. So you move the comma ones to the right, so the power becomes negative there. So the negative 10 also, or the 10 to the raised to the power of negative 1 also sometimes guide you to tell you you're dealing with a very small number, okay, depending obviously on the number itself. And also worth mentioning, whenever you are writing numbers in standard form, it's very important that you should notice that the index here on the base of 10, the index should be an integer. That means it should be a positive whole number, a negative whole number, or 0. So you can't have fractions and stuff like that, or decimals there. Then the number is not in standard form. And the base is always 10. And then the number that you have here, the first digit of the number should be a number that is less than 10, okay, and greater than 0. So it should be like, greater than 0, it should be between 1 and something like that. No, not 0.1. 0.1 is even greater than 0. So from 1 upwards, that's how it's supposed to be. Then they say you have a question here. You're supposed to round each one of the numbers to one significant figure. So I suggest that you look at it closely for 3 marks. 1.9 becomes 2 because that is 1. 1.09, that's the first significant figure. That tens cannot really affect that, so that's going to be a 1. And you will realize that 200, I look at first significant figure, which is the 100 to 200 here, no tens, so you cannot actually influence that to a 300. And 3.65, again, the tenths here, the second significant affects that and change it to a 4. You can either leave your answer as 1 over 800, or you can leave your answer as 0.0012, or some cases, some students leave it in standard form. Please make sure that you try to show all your workings as far as possible. So what I've done, I have brought out a lot of the answers in red so that it can capture your attention. This was also a question that a lot of students actually struggled to answer. Let us just read this question carefully. Pandu bought a car. She paid a deposit of 75,000 Namibian dollars. This is very important. She paid that deposit, okay? And this deposit, this 75,000, is equal to 30% of the cash price of the car, okay? So you can actually have two equivalent fractions. You'll see what I have done, because a lot of times students don't really know, should I use reverse percentages and stuff like that. And also something that can indicate that I probably will have to deal with some sort of reverse percentages, because I do not know what is the actual price of the car. I only know that she paid a deposit, but I don't know what is the actual price of the car. She used a bank loan to pay off the remaining balance. Now, I cannot stress this point very much. The remaining balance means we are supposed to do something. Remember, she paid the $75,000, which is the deposit. We don't know the remaining balance because we can only find the remaining balance once we can determine what is the cash price of the car. And for 3 marks, we are asked to do just that. So what I did here is I then took my equivalent fractions. The 75,000, as you can see here, is equal to, all right, and this is very important that you get it. It's equal to 30% of what the car will cost. And once you have them like this, it's very easy for you to find that value of x. We are looking for naturally a bigger number because 30 over 100, the 100 is bigger, so we're looking for something big. Ultimately, we're looking for the cost price of the car. So you play around. Actually, I can also show you where the reverse percentage is coming from. The moment you have that 30 and you divide it into 100, it's the same as 100 over 30. You multiply it by that. That's where the reverse comes in, the percentages. Ultimately, I also put it up there. Some learners are comfortable doing that. If you put 100 divided by 30, that's the reverse percentage. 100 is always on top, okay? And if when you're dealing with fractions, and this is the thing that I always say to students whenever they get questions like this, whenever you multiply anything by an improper fraction, okay, listen carefully, whenever you multiply anything by an improper fraction, the answer you expect should be more than what you multiplied with. So when you are multiplying then by a proper fraction, that means the denominator is bigger than the numerator, you do get such instances where they're telling you the television was this and this represents so much increase in the price, all right, and you have to find the original price. Then you probably add something there and you are dealing with a proper fraction, and then you're going to get something less. Okay, so that is one of the things to remember whenever you deal with fractions or reverse percentages. But now we know what is the cost price of the car. The cost price of the car is nothing but 250,000. So remember this, because we are still supposed to find the remaining balance. So which means we have to play around with the 75,000 and the 250,000. Part B of the same question, the loan period is 5 years, which means then she went and borrowed this money and she must pay it off, all right? Then the bank has got its charges, and the bank charges 8.5% compound interest. Very important. A lot of students, they go and use simple interest, and that is wrong. And it's compounded annually, okay, on the loan she took. She pays off her loan in equal monthly installments. So we are supposed to calculate that installment. So what is very important is we first have to, you know the formula to calculate compound interest. You do not get a mark for writing down the formula, but rather that is the formula, right? The amount is the principal. And here's the problem. The principal is not the 250,000 because we know that she already paid 75,000 cash. So we have to subtract that 75,000 from the 250,000 in order for us to know what is it that she went to borrow. The R stands for the rate, so we're going to put 8.5 in there for R. And the N stands for the number of years. Very important that you put here number of years. So if you have 6 months, it's a half or 0.5. Okay? So the amount of the loan, as I've indicated here, it's 175,000. So I got that by subtracting the 250,000 minus 775,000. So that gives me the amount that she went and borrowed. And then because she borrowed this compounded per year, I want to find out how much is she supposed to pay back. Can you see that? So ultimately, she has to pay 263,139.9208. Now I left it like that because I'm not yet finished answering the question. Now the loan period, and this is very important because we need to know by what should we. The loan period here is 5 years. Now please, she doesn't pay it yearly, but every month because it should be in equal installment, monthly, equal monthly installment. So we need to change that 5 years into months, okay? And that is what I did right here. So what you see is I've calculated, obviously, the 5 years, and I played around with it in order for me to find the set amount of $4,385.67. Be careful with your rounding, okay? The 5 times 12, why did I multiply this by 12? Obviously, there are 12 months in a year, and this gives you 60. So now we know that this is what she is supposed to pay. 5 marks, this was a very good question. You just have to read it, and you must make sure that you understand the particular question. Now there's a C part to this question. It says work out the balance of her loan after the 55th installment. So how much is it after the 55th installment? So what I will do is I'll take what she must pay back to the bank. Then I am subtracting what she pays per month. You see what I did here? Times 55 months. Remember, she has to pay this for 60 months, so it's about 5 months shy of the total loan repayment period. So I actually expect a very small amount of money that she must have left to pay the remaining 5 months. Again, you take what she's paying per month, you multiply it up by 55th month that she pays her installment. You subtract that by the total amount of money that she has to repay the bank anyway, and that gives you $21,928.07. Please do not write 70 cents, it's 7 cents. Okay. Then calculate the amount of interest. This is very straightforward. 2 marks. Remember, we know what she's paying she has to repay to the bank. We now need to know how much did she actually borrow. she borrowed 175,000, okay, and she must pay total 263,000. So the remaining, if you subtract the two, that 88,139 and 92 cents is actually the interest that she has to repay to the bank. Well, question 3 shows a model of a parallelogram, the area that is shaded, cross section, that area we're talking about there, it's a parallelogram. And what we know is that that area, this in shaded, is also equal to 64 square meters, right? So we have the area. We don't have the height, the perpendicular height, not that height. That height is the slant height. I'm talking about the perpendicular height, the one that makes 90 degrees of the base. We are supposed to calculate the height. This is a very straightforward question. However, some students really mess this one up also, because people have forgotten how to find the area of a parallelogram. Well, it's very easy. You know, a parallelogram looks like a rectangle, as I was saying in most of my videos, that has been squashed or pushed to the side. So it's that base area times the perpendicular height. So we do not know what the height is. In fact, that is what we are supposed to find out. But we know the area is equal to 64 square meters. We know that the base is 14. So it's very easy then to find our unknown. You can leave your answer to 3 significant figures, or you can leave it as an improper fraction, or ultimately in the simplest form, a mixed number. And it should be in centimeters. Then we are asked to calculate the volume of the chocolate box. Volume is the area of the cross section. That's the volume of a prism, right? Prism is a solid that has got a constant cross section. The constant cross section of this box is a parallelogram. You multiply that by the length. I did not want to say height here because we might get confused. That length is a 20 centimeter that's there, and you get 1,280 cubic centimeter. Now, there were a lot of answers that varied, and they accepted quite a few. So anything that falls in this range, because it all depends if the students were using the 4.57 or whatever value that they had, and multiply that by 14 and then by 20. Okay, so there was a range that was accepted, but this is the correct answer. Now you're supposed to convert this 1,280 cubic centimeters to cubic millimeters. Now you do know that what I like to do is I like to always bring in a small fact sheet here. It tells me exactly what is 1 cubic centimeter. Always take the bigger one, right? What does it actually mean? Well, it just means 1 centimeter times 1 centimeter times 1 centimeter. Then you use your knowledge of length, because you're supposed to change this bigger unit to millimeters. So what is 1 centimeter actually equal to? Well, in terms of millimeters, it's 10. And then you sort of just change 1 centimeter to 10 millimeter, and you multiply that by itself, and you're going to end up with 1,000 cubic millimeters. So now you know that 1 cubic centimeter is equal to 1,000 cubic millimeter. So if you have 1,280 cubic centimeter, you simply just have to multiply in order for you to have your answer in cubic millimeter. So in this particular case, it's 1,280,000 cubic millimeter. 2 marks, but a lot of times students are still struggling. I always say go back to the basics. It is very useful. Now, this question had a C part, and it says that in a billboard advertisement of this chocolate box, the base of the equivalent shaded area shown in the diagram is 7 meters long. So what I did is I just made a larger version. What they're saying, so these things are not to scale. So imagine this is the billboard, okay, because it shows a chocolate box, right? So it's on a billboard, and this base area on the billboard, the actual one, yeah, right? It's 7 meters long, which is actually 700 centimeters if you convert. And we know the area of the model, okay, it's 64 square centimeter. So we need to find the area then of the advert on the billboard. Okay, so what is important is this is some sort of similarity here. Okay, so in order for us to find this, we definitely have to take the length scale factor. All right, the length scale factor. And once we know what is the length scale factor, and the length scale factor is taking, you can either take 700, okay, that is the length scale factor, and you divide it by 14. Now, if you do that, you are going to calculate what I call the length scale factor. You get 50. All right. So if I was to find volume, all right. So if I was to find volume, for example, all right, my drawing here. If I was to find volume, I would be cubing this. But because I'm supposed to find the area, I'll be squaring that. And you will see that in my answer, okay? So what I did there is I actually got x over 64, which equals to 700 over 14. The x that I have here is this particular missing one, and you should get an answer of 160,000 square meters, because that is the actual thing as it appears on the billboard advertisement. Right, question 4 brings in a little bit of algebra. Okay, it says factorize completely. That means you should not do half things. All right, so you have got to factorize 2x squared minus 4x plus 3xy minus 6y, again 4 terms. And because you have got 4 terms, you're going to factorize this by grouping. Okay, so the first thing is you're going to take these 2 terms, and the common factor there is 2x. And this 2x minus 2 should also be a common factor on the other side. Okay, if not, you have to play around with the signs, but this is a 2-mark question. So in order for you to completely factorize it, you have to put whatever is outside the bracket in its own bracket, like that, and the x minus 2 in its own bracket. Now, it doesn't matter which bracket you put first. It's multiplication. The order of multiplication doesn't really matter. So you get a correct mark for the x minus 2 and 2x plus 3y. Then this is one of the questions that a lot of students have a problem with, and also I suggest that you do a few examples, and borrow maybe material from the high level material, because you do find these type of questions, they appear prominently in their syllabus. All right, we're supposed to express this x squared minus 2x minus 35 in vertex form. This is standard form. Standard form for quadratic trinomials is ax squared plus bx plus c. Vertex form tells you something. It tells you the horizontal translation of the function if you have to draw it, and the q tells you the vertical translation of the function if you have to draw it again. It's a little bit out of your scope, but you will be doing graphs, all right? And typically when you graph a parabola, which is what this particular function is. When you graph a parabola, we need to know how it is, like, the lowest point. Basically, the lowest point, if it opens up, that's if the value of a is positive, like in this particular case, a is 1, then the parabola will open up like this. So what tells you what is the lowest y value and the lowest x value here? So ultimately, we also call it the turning point. And you can get that information from here. The stuff inside, if you take the stuff inside it and you equate it to 0, it tells you whether this particular graph is going to the right or is going to be to the left. Because had it been to the left or to the right, because you have to think really in terms of how is it that this particular graph could be graph. It could have been something, that gone to this way. So this is what I mean by the horizontal translation. And up or down, how many units is going up or down. So that's what the vertex tells us. But anyway, it's not something that we're going to go deep into now, but it's quite useful information to have, and you will see what I mean. All right, so we have here, what I did is, and this is how I actually like to approach this particular question, I like to change it to y equals to, because it's a function, all right? And what I do is I like to take this minus 35 on the other side, obviously becomes y plus 35. So where this 1 is coming from, the one that I'm adding, and I've done this here, because you always find half of this, that's your side work, half of the middle term, half of b, right? Half of that is negative 1, so that's going to be here. And if I square it, I added 1 both sides. So this red one is actually here. If you have to multiply it out, you realize it's added. So I've added that one to complete the square. Now x minus 1 all squared is a completed square. Okay. And the only thing I then do is I add 35 plus 1, and then we bring it back to where it is going to be minus 31. So I put the 1 here because you need to know what is the value of A. A is 1, P is negative 1, and Q is 36. Ultimately, this is all that you have to do. I suggest you take a few of them and you work them out and you play around the way I did. There is also the particular formula that you have to find the axis of symmetry of a parabola. All right, this is a formula you can use. Now, here's the catch with this particular formula. Whatever this value here of x is, if you put it back in here, okay, if you put it back in here, then it has to be opposite. If it's a 1, because x equals to 1, if you take it back, it must be x equals to minus 1. And if you take that one and you put it into the original function, okay, original function, you're going to get your minus 36, which is there. So you can use this as well. All right. This formula is particularly useful, and I hope that you also spend some time on it. I can also explain it in later videos. Then you have a B part to that same question. Now they did some, I think it was a mistake, all right, because they gave a quadratic equation in the examination, and all the learners were given this mark because this quadratic equation, it does not have solutions. There are no roots for that. The word root is just a simple word that says that the solution doesn't exist. Now, one of the reasons that you can see that, suppose you have the quadratic equation formula and you know how to substitute in correctly. You first have to identify your A, all right? You have to identify your B value. You have to identify your C value, and you punch them into your formula. Whatever is under the square root, and I put it in red there because that is where the problem comes. The square root of a negative number doesn't exist. So this whole thing will not factorize. You will not solve. You won't find roots for it, sorry. Okay? And that is what I said there. And that is why there are no solutions to this particular quadratic equation. So it's also worth knowing that if you have got something under the square root, you know, the discriminant there, you know that if that is negative, you will not find solutions here. So they made a mistake with the signs, but ultimately all the learners got these 3 marks in this particular question. The second question for 2 marks was rather also poorly answered most of the time by the learners, but it's not really a difficult question because the idea is to do something to that index, and what you do is you multiply the index by its inverse, okay, because you want the y to be alone, right? And whatever you do on the right, you should do on the left. So, but what I did is I first wrote 9 as 3 squared. You don't have to, because if you rely on a calculator, you can get this answer, right? And what I know is that when I have, you know, the power law says that if I have a power or a base that is raised to multiple indices, please, this is the index. It's not a fraction. It's not improper fraction, please, or a mixed number. It's a power. It's an index. It's an exponent. When you multiply them, you're going to end up with 3 cubed. You get your 27. In fact, you can get your 27 right off, even if this was 9. Okay. Then there was simultaneous equation, 5 marks. For me, this is a very nice question. When you look at the first equation, the bases are the same. So if the bases are the same, we can drop the bases and we can just equate the exponents. And the second one, y squared plus x equals to 7. So that means I have 2 values of y and I will have 1 value of x, okay? After dropping the bases, you end up with 2 equations. Well, the first one is for you to find the value of x. Once you determine x is equal to negative 2, then you take this value and you substitute it into the second equation for x, and that's going to allow you to get the 2 solutions. So once you substitute x equals to negative 2 into this equation, you realize that you get 9, and well, I moved it around here because it's the difference of two squares. Well, you can use other techniques. You can take the square root of 9, positive and negative. Bottom line is there is supposed to be two answers. So here you have your values for x, one value for x, and the two values for y. And it makes sense that y has to have two answers because of the quadratic there. And remember, anything that you square is always going to be positive. Then question 5 in the paper. You are given a diagram and you have ABC and ACD are two triangles and they share side AC. And you can also see from the information that triangle ABC is a right angle triangle of 90 degrees right here. And then you have got the measurement here, which is 2 times square root of 3. And the value of AC, or the distance there, is 4 centimeters. Angle ACD, and angle, we're talking about this particular angle here, and angle ACB, talking about this angle. As you can see, the lines look identical, so these two angles are actually equal, and that particular angle there is equal to, or is x degrees. Now, they say determine the value of, or the length of AB. Now, if you look at ABC, it's a right angle triangle, and it's possible for you to find AB, and you know when you're looking for a short side of a right angle triangle, you're supposed to subtract. So you subtract one of the short sides that is given, that is BC, but it's a square of that. Now, there's something here that I need to explain to you. When it comes to this, it's very important that you put the brackets as the way I did, because if you only put it here without brackets, then you will have a little problem that 2 times the square root of 3, and it will only be the square root of 3 that will be squared. So make sure that you do include the whole value, all right, in order for you to get the correct answer. Now they say you're supposed to show that this particular angle here is 60 degrees. Again, you have got two sides. You also have the third side now, which means if you have got all three sides of a right angle triangle, you can use the tangent ratio, you can use the sine ratio, you can use the cosine ratio. So these are the different ratios as it is. The sine of an angle is the opposite, divided by the hypotenuse. The cosine is the adjacent. Now the adjacent is now the 2 centimeter. When you take the 2 divided by 4, the cosine and the sine ratio are co-functions. And they have, the denominator is always the hypotenuse, which means the denominator is always bigger in this particular instance than the numerator. The tangent can be either way. The tangent, with respect to that angle, the tangent will be opposite divided by the adjacent. Adjacent to x is AB, and we know what that is, right? If you show this, this should be more enough. Or if you continue to say that x will be the inverse of the angle, or the same with the tangent, the inverse of that, or the inverse of cosine. Once you press that, and you must make sure again that in order for you to prove this and to deal with this type of problems in trigonometry, that your calculator mode is on degree. All right, the little DEG on the screen there, or a D, depending on the calculator that you use. This is more than sufficient, or that is more than sufficient to show that that angle is 60 degrees. Right, the next slide involved a little bit of trigonometry, a little bit more deeper. It says we are supposed to find the value of AD. The length of AD, as you could see that this triangle is not a right angle triangle. So for you to find the value of AD, we have this angle, we have two sides that are flanked by it. We need to find this distance. So the cosine, the law of cosines, or the cosine law, comes into effect here. All right, when you use the sine rule is when you have a complete pair, that is an angle with a complete side, but you don't have that. You have got two sides, included angle and a missing one. So the cosine rule will come in handy. Okay, so to find the length of AD, you'll have to use the law of cosines. Remember, you do not get marked for writing down the equation, but sometimes it's very useful. All right, so you take that distance, you square it, equals to 2 squared plus 4 squared minus 2 times 4 times the cosine of 30. Now, it's very important that you make sure that this part of the work is calculated. And there's something here that I need to also bring into your attention as far as this is concerned. So I did this particular part because sometimes a lot of students don't know that this is actually one term and you need to get this answer, especially if you get some negative angle here. All right, the cosine of 120 degrees, for example, is a negative, but it does not mean it is a different term. So you can get this value and get those ones, and then you make sure that you get all of this. Primarily, if you punch everything as is on your calculator, you should not have a problem arriving at this particular value. Now the way I went from AD squared to AD, so I took the square root. The square root gives you 2.478, and then you give it to three significant figures. So that is the value of AD with 4 marks, and show as much working as possible. Now the next thing that you are supposed to do is to find the area of triangle ADC. Again, you cannot use the old formula for right angle triangles. You have to use the formula a half times the two distances that you are given, multiplied by the sine of the included angle. Okay, once you play around with that, you also arrive at the area of this triangle is 2 centimeters squared. It's a half times 8, which is 4, and 4 times the sine of 30 degrees gives you 2 square centimeters. Question 6. This is an algebra question. It involves some functions. The function that you are given here is such that ax all squared, ax all squared. So whatever a is and x is all squared. Now this is a point that it passes. This is point x, very important. So I can substitute for x, and that is the y value. That's why I put this in red. A lot of students didn't really get that this is a point on the Cartesian plane, all right, where the value of x is 2, so you'll be putting that 2 in here, and the y is nothing but f of x. Remember, f of x is equal to y is the same thing. We are talking about the same function. So the value of y, this 256, is what you're basically going to put in there. And it's important that you see how to keep the brackets. 256 is equal to a times 2, which is that 2a squared, giving you 4a squared. Then it's easy for you to find the value of 4. Of a, divide throughout by 4, you get 64, and the square root of 64 is 2 numbers. That means a can be 8 and negative 8 as well. Then they say write f of x in its simplest form for 1 mark. Now that you know what this value is, and this is what a lot of students didn't quite get, that if you put any value of a there, whether the positive 8 or minus 8, the moment you square it, it's always going to be positive. So f of x equals to 64x squared is sufficient. That is what we are looking for. In this particular question, you have got a function g of x such that g of x is equal to 2x minus 1. It's a straight line function. And you're just supposed to find with g of negative 3. That is very easy. Everywhere we have the 3, with the x, you substitute it with negative 3. So if you input negative 3 into this function, what is the output? That's basically what we are looking for. And it's very easy. It's just going to be 2 times negative 3, which is negative 6, minus 1, which gives you negative 7. That is the value when g is equal to negative 3. Not when g is equal to negative 3, but when you input negative 3 for x into the function. This is find the inverse of a function. Now, before I show you what I've done, the inverse of a function like this should be very straightforward for you to realize. The inverse is an operation, it's going to be reversed. This has to be added, and that two will have to be divided. Ultimately, you can also bring in where you change, you bring in a y for this whole g of x, and then you swap the letters around, okay? And then you try to make y the subject of the formula. But it's important that you don't leave it as y equals to that, because you're not looking for y, but you're looking for the inverse of the function, right? So you're looking for the inverse of the function. So this was supposed to be the inverse of the function. Maybe that one was missing in that particular case. This is composition of functions. So we're going to take the two functions. I've got function g and I've got function f. So we're going to work from the back. So we're going to take the whole function of g where there is an x, and I put it in red. So where they have x there, we're going to take this whole expression and we're going to substitute it there for x. Please take note of the mark, very important. And if I do this and I took function g into f, remember there's where the x is. Now it's just a matter of just expanding the brackets, right? This means this 2x minus 1 all squared. You evaluate that. You get to this value, 4x squared minus 4x plus 1. You can multiply that over now. Please do not start multiplying this over. You first have to square. And then later on, you get the final answer by multiplying throughout by 64. 64 times 4 is 256. X squared, 64 times negative 4x is minus 256x. And 64 times 1 is positive 64. And this is what we're looking for in this particular question. Question 7. A circle with center O passes through A, B, and C. As you can see it, here you have the values of A, B, and C. There's a circle, it passes through those points. And this particular angle here, BAC, this angle is 47 degrees. Then determine with reason why angle BOC, this angle here at the center, is what is the value of that angle. Now, besides the fact that you can see this is an isosceles triangle here, I also did it, you will see it in a minute. And then angles that are subtended. Now, this is very important. You see this BC here. This is a chord. The chord subtends the angle at the center. It creates this angle at the center. And it also creates the angle at the circumference. Now, the rule is that the angle at the center is twice the angle at the circumference. So this 47 could have been anywhere, perhaps there. Okay, mind my drawing. It will still imply that is 47. Then it still implies that this here is 2 times 47, which, as you could see, is 94 degrees, as indicated. It's one of those circle theorems that you should remember, that you should have a look at. So please make sure that you do get to go through that work. The next one that we had to find with reason, obviously, was to find angle OCB. Now, OCB. Now, remember OCB. So we're talking about this particular angle here. Now, since this is an isosceles triangle, and we know that this is 94 degrees here, it should not be that difficult for you to find the angle. So I took that part out, 94 degrees, and we can see that these two angles are equal, and since they are equal, then the sum of everything is 180. So if I subtract 94 from 180 as indicated, then we find that that angle is 43 degrees. And you can give a very short reason just by saying base angles of an isosceles triangle are equal, for 1 mark there. Question 8, this has to do with linear programming. A lot of students have problems with this particular question, but it's very important that you do read it and that you also make sure that you visit and you actually do these things. A shop sells 2 types of toys, toy A and toy B. The shop owner pays $8 million for toy A and $14 million for toy B. The shop owner estimates that no more than 2,000 toys will be sold every month, and he does not plan to invest more than 20,000 in inventory of these toys. Now, let the number of toys A, let that be represented by X, and the toy B, let them be represented by Y. Now you're supposed to show this inequality. Remember, it says that it doesn't plan to invest more than, not more than. So this inequality comes into play, right? So it's very easy, very straightforward. For 1 mark, you just take it, your 8x, which was the one's toy A cost, plus 14y should be less than 20,000 or equal to. When you divide that by 2, obviously it's going to give us what we were about to prove. So this part is important for us to make sure that you have shown that particular answer. Now, there are other 3 inequalities here. Now, it's not so obvious because the information, you already have this one here, all right? Because it says involving x and or y, all right? And we know this one, all right? X plus y should be less than or equal to 2,000. That comes from, he estimated that he does not have more than 2,000 toys that will be sold. That is the first. Most of the learners could get this one. Now the other 2, since they are not obvious, you have to take them as default ones, right? X equals to 0, or x is greater or equal to 0, and y is greater or equal to 0. It's very important, this information, that you do get it. There's no other information supplied in the stem, so we have to consider the default ones. Using 2 centimeters on both axes. Now I did it here also on a piece of paper and I scanned it on. The distance here is, as you can see, 2 centimeter. That's what you're supposed to have. Obviously the line x is greater or equal to 0 is the y-axis, and y is greater or equal to 0 is the x-axis. And these are the 3 lines that you have to have. You label your axis, toy A here, toy B, very important, and you shade the unwanted region. Okay, now it's very important that you know how the marks are allocated for that. So I have included that little marking specification for you. The x, the y-axis scale and your x-axis scale should be correct. You're getting a mark for that, 2 centimeters. All right, make sure of that. And also you get a mark for the lines drawn or implied. As you can see, the line x plus y is less than or equal to 2,000. All these lines, they are drawn, they are implied, and you must make sure they are there. And the shading also. So all in all, you get to your 6 marks, and it's very important that you follow the procedure, show everything where possible. And this is perhaps very important. We shade the unwanted region. Okay, with shading, you can pick a point. For example, you can pick this particular point, and then you use this inequality perhaps and see whether that makes sense. If I add 500 for x plus 1,000, do I get less than or equal to 2,000? Yes, 500 plus 1,000 is 1,500, and that is less than or equal to that. Therefore, the unwanted region that I must shade is everything on this side here, all right? And this is where the solutions will lie. Next question involves you to take a little bit of your diagram, and you are supposed to find the maximum monthly total profit. And those points you'll find very close to, and you can use the line because on it, because it's a solid line. If it's a broken line, you cannot use these points. So you have to play around here, and this is now where it's more or less a trial and error. You have to use your 2x plus y plus 3y. You pick values of x and values of y. You substitute them in there until you do realize what is the biggest value. All right, I have used 1,250 for x, All right, I showed it here with the arrows. These are the values that I've used. And when we were marking this last year, we made sure that we accepted answers in any one of these ranges here. So if your answer was in that range, you get a mark for that, 3 marks for that. This question is best if you can get graph paper and you start doing it also from the beginning. The next question deals with transformations as a topic. You are supposed to, for 3 marks. Now here's one thing that I want you to always remember. When a question involves a 3-mark transformation, the only transformations that is 3 marks is rotation and enlargement, because when you describe these, you have to give in 3 particular set of information. If you say this is a rotation, you must say rotation gives you a mark, like for example what this is. And then you must give the center of rotation, and the center of rotation is at the origin, okay? And then you must give the angle of rotation, the angle of rotation. Now this angle of rotation is always messy for some learners. So from A to B in this direction, it's 90 degrees counterclockwise. But when you just simply write plus 90 degrees, we know that you mean it's anti-clockwise. Or if you go the other direction, okay, if you go the other direction, that means if you go this way, that is clockwise, is it not so? All right, so from A to B, if it had to travel all this way, it will definitely be clockwise, but 270 degrees. So you can write this story like that, okay? Or you can simply just say minus 270 degrees. We know exactly what it is that you mean. They say you must translate polygon B by vector 6, -5. So polygon B, as it was there, now translate means you slide it, all right? So this is the X direction on top, and it's positive. So if it's positive, you slide it then to the right, 6 units. So if I take this particular point here, and you count, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the Y direction has to go down -5 by -5 units. So that will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you do it for all of these regions, you'll definitely see your translated polygon would be here, okay, in this particular quadrant. It's very interesting. They say you must enlarge. Here's the thing about enlarging by a negative scale factor. When you enlarge something by a negative scale factor, let's say this is the triangle here, and an enlargement by a negative scale factor, it flips it around in the opposite direction, okay? It flips it around. That is what you would realize if I had to create something like that. Never mind my drawing, but it flips it around. If the scale factor was positive and this is the shape, then its enlargement will be in the same sort of direction, okay? I hope you can see that. But if it's a negative, the whole shape is flipped around from the center of enlargement. That is one of the things you have to realize with this particular question. So as you can see, the shape D from A, the center is here, and it's flipped around. Now if I was to do all of that, and I show you, for example, the corresponding points, if you take the corresponding points and you draw a line here, you draw a line here, for example, you would see what I mean by that shape being flipped around and so on and so on. All right, but that's basically the enlargement of that. Draw the lines and it's flipped around like that in that particular order. This is also a question that was poorly answered in the question paper. Now question 10 involves some arithmetic progression. And what is important here is that you are told that it's an AP, an arithmetic progression. So you can identify your first term. Normally we use the letter A for the first term, which is 7 1/3. And we can also work out our common difference, and we found our common difference by subtracting successive terms from each other. So I can take term 2 and I can subtract term 1 from term 2. That is like 8 minus 7 and 1/3. Well, when you do that, you get an answer of 2/3. For example, you can find some values that is very useful. Now, the first question, you're supposed to write down the next term. It's very easy. The next term, you simply just add. You just add 2/3 to that 10. That is how you find the next term. Part B, for 4 marks, you're supposed to find the rule that connects these terms together. Now, the formula to calculate is T sub n. All right. Some books are using U sub n. It's not a big deal. It's always the first term plus in brackets we have n minus 1. Now I'm putting my common difference here in brackets, okay? Sometimes it's a negative number, people tend to make mistakes. So my first term is 7 1/3 plus n minus 1 times 2 over 3, and then you clean it up, you eventually end up with this particular answer. All right? Even if you leave your answer like that, you still deserve all 4 marks. Which term is equal to 30 and 2/3? You must use your rule. So I've used my rule here and I equate it to that 30 and 2/3. To solve this particular equation, I first change this mixed number to an improper fraction. And now I have got the denominators are exactly the same. I can drop them. And once I drop them, I work with my numerators and I find my particular answer. And you should realize that it is the 36th term that is equal to 30 and 2/3. Now they ask you to find the sum. That means you add up all the terms together until you get to the last term. The last term happened to be 30 and 2/3. Since I know what the last term is, I can use this particular formula. Okay, so I take the sum of the 36 terms, I take my first term, add it with the last term, and I can find that it's 684. Ultimately, you can also go ahead and use the old formula, the other formula that a lot of learners tend to use, but they can easily make mistakes. You use n over 2 in brackets 2a plus n minus 1 times d. That is the formula. You're going to get exactly the same answer. The heights H of 130 learners at Ongwe Combined School in grade 8, 9, and 10 were recorded as follows. So I have the table here. So what this particular table means, it means that if you look at this particular row, 7 learners have heights of 118 to 128. Okay, but 128 not included. So 7 learners have heights in that category. 20 learners here have heights between 128 and 137, and so on and so on. If you add all these learners together, the frequency, the number of learners should be 130. It should match the information given. Something else that I perhaps need to highlight, and we're going to get to that part, is we will be asked later on to find the mean, the estimate of a mean. All right, and here's the thing about that question. We don't know exactly, let's take this group, how many learners in this 7. We don't know who has got which height. We only know 7 of them have a height that is between 118 and 128. But you don't know whether one has 127, one has 120, one has 118. We don't know. They're sort of grouped there. Okay? So in order for us to find the mean, it's not possible, but we will find an estimate of the mean. And I'll come back to this particular table. So remember this, very important, that I'll show you how it is when we deal with the estimate of the mean from this particular table. Now, they ask us in the first instance to complete the frequency table. So I've done it in red. Okay, frequency, cumulative frequency means you just add and you continue. 0 plus 7, yeah, 20 plus 7, 21 plus that, and so on, and you get to 130. So you use your frequency table in order to accumulate, to add up as you go. So learners who have got a height of less than 118, nobody, okay? Nobody has a height of less than 118. So 118 will be where we start. So if we have our cumulative frequency, and this part will be the cumulative frequency, and here will be the heights, we will start our particular graph somewhere here, and that is how that ogive will go. All right, we'll have a part like that, so we can't start at 0 because there are no people who have got a height of 0, and height of 0 obviously doesn't make sense. All right, so let's look at the next question. Well, one of the things before we go to the next one is, how do they mark this in red? Well, the way they mark this ones in red, you are getting 1 mark for only 2 or 3 correct answers. You get 2 marks when you get 4 to 6 correct answers. But ultimately, when you get all the correct 7 answers, you get full marks. This question says that you are supposed to draw a cumulative frequency curve, an ogive, that represent the given data. Now, before I show you the curve, I want to explain just what is meant by lower quartile and upper quartile. Lower quartile represents 25% of the total frequency, and then 75% or 3/4 or the third quarter represent 75% of the total frequency. All right, so when you are asked to calculate or to find a lower quartile, you'll see that there will be a way for you to find 25% of the frequency that you are using or the data that you are evaluating, and then you read off on the given axes. And sometimes they ask you to calculate the interquartile range. Now, the interquartile range is simply calculated by subtracting the interquartile range. You just simply calculate by subtracting your upper minus the lower. Okay, excuse the handwriting there. The upper minus the lower. But in this particular case, they are not asking for that particular question. Right, so let us have a look and see how the curve will look like. So what you have here now, I drew it on a graph paper. There's just a few things that you need to be able to have a look at. Number one is obviously, I talked about the lower quartile. So you see I went for 25% of the frequency, and then I will read off. Suppose they ask me to find the height, all right? What is the lower quartile? And also if they ask you to find the upper quartile, that will be 75% of the data, and you draw yourselves a line across like that and down like this, and then you read off the value, and that is what they are asking in the next particular question. So you get all 8 marks for every one of the points that have been drawn, so or plotted. So if this is this point, that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 right here, 7 and 8. Okay, all these 8 points, if they are plotted correctly, you get 3 marks. Obviously you start losing marks for plotting only 6 to 7 points, then you only get 2 marks. If you plot only 4 to 5 points, you only get 1 mark. You get also a mark for a complete, because this is a 4-mark question, a smooth curve. Please do not take a ruler and join these points together. It has to be a smooth curve. All right, and also something else that I need to explain is this little gap here, because the data starts at 118. This just shows the part of the axis that is cut out, okay? Because you see we started at 110, 120, 130, 150, 40, and 150, and so on and so on. So just take note of that particular one. So that is how you work through that particular question. Also, what is very important for you to know is that you are using this cumulative frequency on this side in order for you to plot. So when there is no measurements less than 118. Obviously then you count and you find 118, you start plotting that point. 128, so you also need to know what your scale represent. Every small little square on the graph represents 10 or represent 1 unit, because it's 10 divided by 10 squares. Okay, so 128 is the same here. Every small square represents 10 in this particular case, because it's 10 divided by 110 divided by 10. All right, or you find the difference between 110 and 120, it gives you 10. So again, excuse me, every little square here represents 1. So you can find 128, for example, it will be 125 is here, so 128 is somewhere here, and then you go always up and you plot that particular point, and that is how you go and plot it. And once you have joined all the points, then you use a smooth curve, remember, in order for you to draw the ogive. So what is here is basically just the same thing. I just flipped it around so it can fit on the slide. This is exactly how it is supposed to look like. The next question, as I was already talking about it, was for you to find the lower quartile. As again, if you do 25% of the frequency data, then we accept an answer in the range of 138.5 to 139.5. Not everyone will have exactly the same answer, but it should be in that range for 1 mark. And then the upper quartile is 75% of the data. And you draw that line, you find out, you read the corresponding measurement or height, and then we accepted any answer between 155.5 and 156.5. The modal class, if I can bring the table back for you to have an idea, the modal class, the word mode represents where most of the frequency happens. So if you look at this particular class, only 7, and this particular class, that is people with heights of 128 to 137, only 20. So the highest class there, which is where the mode is, the most is people who have the heights of between 145 centimeters and 155, all right? Not 145, but 154 perhaps. So this is the modal class, okay? And that is how you view that particular question for 1 mark. The next question is about finding the estimated mean. Okay, so what I did here is I calculated it out already, but there's a few things that I need to explain as far as the estimated mean is concerned, right? This mean is an estimation, it's not the real value. Simply what I mean by that is, suppose we take this particular class and we take also, let's say we take this one right here, even for that matter. Okay, so let's just maybe perhaps consider this one. So in the class of learners who have heights between 118 and 128, there are 7 learners. And here learners who have got heights of 162 and 173, there are 16 learners. The problem is we don't exactly know which learner the actual height of each learner. We just know that because this is grouped data. So that is why the mean will be an estimation. So what we do is, I want to explain where does this 123, for example, and in this particular 167.5 comes from. How do we calculate that particular one? Obviously, that's the same thing. How do we calculate then also the other one? So I'm not going to do these ones that I'm showing in red. I'm just going to do the 2 in yellow for you to get the idea, all right? Because to calculate the mean, you have to definitely add and then divide throughout. So let's take an example there. We take 128 and we subtract 118. That gives you 10, okay? So we want to find the average there. What the average would be, then we find 10 divided by 2, which is 5. All right. And then we take this lower value here, the 118 in this particular case. So we say 118. And we add the 5 there. So suppose we add the 5, that gives us the 123. Let's take, for example, the other one, 173, and we subtract 162. When you do subtract 162 from 173, you get 11. And when you find half of 11, because we're just finding the average, what is the average height of the learners in that particular class group, then we take the lower value of 162 and we add 5.5. So what we are saying is that in this particular group or class, the average height of the learners is 167.5, and that's how you do it for all the other ones. And you multiply by the frequency, you sum them up, and then you divide throughout by the total number of learners, the total frequency, and this gives us a height of 148.35. So that tells us that this school, the learners have got a height of approximately 1.5 meters. Okay, so this is in centimeters, and then you give that answer. That is how that particular question is done. The last part in the particular question says, what is the probability of randomly picking a learner whose height falls in this particular class? Now, I've worked it out here, but let me bring back the table a little bit more. So you'll see that the learners who are in this group between 173, they are only 4. All right, so 4 out of 130, that's already the answer, or you can simplify it, or you can give it as a decimal as 0.0308, or some learners go ahead and they give it as a percentage. All right, so any one of these answers would do. Personally, I will go with the 2 over the 65. This brings to the end this particular question paper. As I said, I hope that you can go through the paper. And also, as you go through the paper, you try to work out the solutions before you just look at the video. But you can also pause the video to have a look at where you got stuck. And you can join my mathematics Google Classrooms. These are the codes. So if you are a grade 12 learner and you are doing core, you will find some material that I put up there. You can just join. You must have email address in order for you to join. You join Google Classroom, you just download that app or join the class, and then you enter this code and it will take you to my Google Classroom. And I have got higher level grade 12 extended, grade 10 and grade 11, and all of the different codes are there. Ultimately, if you have a mathematical question that you are struggling with, you take a picture of the problem and then you send a WhatsApp text to any one of these numbers, preferably WhatsApp to this number on top, the 081, or send me an email to any one of these, and I will solve your particular question and post the YouTube solution or the solution on YouTube. With that, thank you. I'm going to do paper 2, and I'm going to post up paper 2 tomorrow of last year, that's extended, and then later in the week I'm going to do the core question papers as well as the higher level question papers of last year. The idea is to do about 2018 and 17 and 19 question papers, and for you to be ready for the upcoming examinations.